Every laugh you've ever had can be traced back to a moment that changed the course of human history. But here's the strange part. Scientists now believe the first laugh may have happened millions of years before humans even existed, which raises an almost impossible question. If there were no humans, who was laughing? Was there really a first laugh? Did someone make the world's first joke? Or did laughter begin as something far more important than humor? Because hidden inside one of the most ordinary sounds you make every day is a survival tool, older than civilization, older than language, and perhaps even older than the earliest humans themselves. The search for the first laugh takes us back millions of years, into ancient forests filled with creatures that looked nothing like us, where one simple sound may have quietly changed the future of our species. And the deeper scientists looked, the stranger the story became. Most people assume laughter exists because something is funny. But according to modern science, that's probably not why laughter evolved at all. In fact, the earliest laugh wasn't about jokes. It wasn't about comedy. And it certainly wasn't entertainment. It may have been the difference between life and death. To understand why, scientists turn to the only living creatures that still preserve echoes of our ancient past: chimpanzees, bonobos, and gorillas. What they discovered was completely unexpected. Spend a few minutes watching young chimpanzees chase each other through the forest, wrestling, tumbling, and pretending to bite one another. And eventually, you'll hear a strange, rhythmic panting sound. At first, it doesn't sound anything like human laughter. But after listening closely, the resemblance becomes impossible to ignore. Researchers spent decades recording these sounds, comparing them with our own laughter, and slowly realized something remarkable. These animals weren't simply making random noises. They were communicating. Every breath seemed to carry the same message. This is only play. You're safe. Suddenly, a playful bite wasn't mistaken for a real attack. A chase didn't become a fight. Everyone understood the rules. But that discovery created an even bigger mystery. If chimpanzees, bonobos, and gorillas all laugh in their own way, how old is laughter really? The answer would push its origins back so far that it forces us to rethink what it actually means to be human. For years, scientists assumed the answer would begin with the first humans. It didn't. Then they looked at Neanderthals. Still too recent. The deeper they searched, the further back the trail seemed to go, until it disappeared into a world where humans didn't even exist. More than 10 million years ago, dense forests stretched across parts of Africa. The creatures living there weren't chimpanzees as we know them today, and they certainly weren't human. They were ancient apes, ancestors of several species that would eventually take very different evolutionary paths. Some would become gorillas, some would become chimpanzees and bonobos, and one branch, after millions of years of change, would eventually become us. If laughter existed back then, it would mean one of humanity's most recognizable behaviors is older than humanity itself. That sounds almost impossible. Yet scientists began finding evidence that pointed in exactly that direction. The first clues didn't come from fossils. They came from watching animals that are still alive today. Researchers spent decades observing chimpanzees, bonobos, and gorillas as they played together. Young apes chased one another through the trees, wrestled across the ground, and gently pretended to bite, behaviors that looked surprisingly familiar to anyone who has watched children playing. Then, something caught the researchers' attention. Whenever the play became rough, the animals produced a strange series of rhythmic panting sounds. At first, the noises didn't sound like laughter at all. There were no loud chuckles, no giggles, no roaring bursts of amusement. But the more scientists analyzed them, the more remarkable they became. These sounds appeared at almost exactly the same moments when humans laugh, not after hearing a joke. Not during danger, but during play. The timing wasn't a coincidence. The sound itself was acting like a signal. It told everyone nearby, this isn't a fight. Nobody's trying to hurt anyone. It's safe to keep playing. Think about how important that would have been. Imagine two young apes tumbling across the forest floor. One lunges forward and pretends to bite the other's arm. Without some kind of signal, that playful bite could easily be mistaken for a real attack. One misunderstanding, one panic, and play could instantly turn into violence. But a simple, breathy laugh changed everything. In a fraction of a second, everyone understood the difference between aggression and play. That tiny sound allowed trust to exist, where confusion might have taken over. And trust in evolution is incredibly valuable. Animals that played together learned together. They practiced fighting without getting injured. They built stronger social bonds. They learned who they could rely on. In other words, what looked like harmless fun was actually preparing them for survival. Then, researchers made an even more surprising discovery. Chimpanzees weren't the only ones doing it. Bonobos produced nearly identical play vocalizations. So did gorillas. Each species sounded a little different, but the pattern was unmistakable. That raised a question scientists couldn't ignore. If 3 different great ape species all shared this behavior, where did it come from? There was only one explanation that made sense. They had inherited it. By comparing these vocalizations across the great apes, researchers concluded that the last common ancestor shared by humans, chimpanzees, bonobos, and gorillas probably produced its own primitive version of laughter. That ancestor lived somewhere between 10 and 16 million years ago. If that's true, then laughter didn't begin with Homo sapiens. It didn't begin with Neanderthals. It may not have even begun with the first humans. Instead, the roots of laughter were already echoing through ancient forests long before anyone carved tools, painted caves, or spoke a single word. But those ancient sounds were still very different from the laughter you hear today. Nobody was telling jokes. Nobody was making clever observations. Nobody was laughing because something was funny. So how did a simple breathing signal eventually become one of humanity's most emotional and universal behaviors? That transformation would take millions of years. And it began when our ancestors left the forests behind. Leaving the forest changed everything. For millions of years, our ancestors had lived beneath thick canopies where trees offered food, shelter, and an escape from predators. But as the climate shifted, those forests began to shrink. Vast grasslands spread across Africa, forcing some early humans into a world that was far more open and far more dangerous. Among them was a species called Homo erectus. They looked different from us, but they had already taken one of the biggest steps in human history. They walked long distances on 2 legs, crafted stone tools with surprising skill, and began exploring landscapes that no earlier human had dared to cross. But the open savanna came with a brutal reality. Out there, surviving alone was almost impossible. A single person couldn't easily defend against predators. One hunter couldn't bring down large prey. One parent couldn't always protect a child. If Homo erectus wanted to survive, they had to do something our earlier ancestors rarely needed to do on such a large scale. They had to trust each other. And trust is much harder to build than it sounds. Imagine spending hours tracking an animal beneath the scorching African sun. Everyone is exhausted. Every mistake wastes precious energy. Hunger makes tempers short. One wrong decision could mean going to sleep with empty stomachs. Then, just before reaching camp, one hunter trips over a rock. The meat slips from his hands. It tumbles down a small hill. For a heartbeat, no one moves. After such a difficult day, that mistake could easily spark anger. Instead, someone lets out a laugh. Another joins in. Within seconds, the tension disappears. The group gathers the food, helps the embarrassed hunter back to his feet, and keeps walking. We can't know if that exact moment ever happened. No fossil preserves a laugh. No ancient footprint records a joke. But anthropologists believe scenes like this were probably common, because laughter does something remarkably powerful. It transforms stress into connection. Modern science has shown that when people laugh together, the brain releases chemicals such as endorphins, creating feelings of trust, comfort, and belonging. Even complete strangers become more cooperative after sharing genuine laughter. Your brain isn't rewarding laughter by accident. It's rewarding something that helped your ancestors survive. The more researchers studied hunter-gatherer societies, the clearer this pattern became. The strongest groups weren't simply the fastest hunters or the toughest fighters. They were often the groups that worked together most effectively. And cooperation depends on something deeper than strength. It depends on relationships. Laughter helped build those relationships. It softened conflicts before they grew into dangerous arguments. It reassured nervous children. It strengthened friendships between adults who depended on one another every single day. In a world where survival often relied on the people standing beside you, even small moments of shared joy carried enormous value. Then, archaeology uncovered another clue. At ancient sites dating back hundreds of thousands of years, researchers found the remains of individuals who had lived for years despite devastating injuries. Some had shattered bones that healed. Others had lost teeth long before they died. A few suffered disabilities severe enough that surviving alone would have been impossible. Someone had fed them, protected them, waited for them to recover. That discovery changed how scientists viewed early humans. These weren't loose collections of individuals competing against one another. They were communities. Communities built on care, patience, and long-term relationships. And wherever people form relationships that deep, laughter almost always follows. Not because life is easy, but because laughter reminds us that we're facing life's hardships together. Yet an even bigger mystery was waiting. If laughter had become such a powerful social tool, why does human laughter sound so different from the laughter of every other great ape? The answer begins with one of the greatest evolutionary breakthroughs our species would ever make: learning to control the voice itself. By now, the story seems almost complete. Our ancient ancestors laughed during play. Laughter helped build trust. It strengthened friendships and made cooperation easier. Case closed. Except one enormous mystery still remained. If laughter is millions of years old, why don't chimpanzees tell jokes? After all, they play. They live in social groups. They even produce their own version of laughter. So why did only humans turn laughter into comedy? The answer wasn't hidden in laughter at all. It was hidden in the human voice. Sometime during our evolutionary journey, our ancestors underwent one of the most extraordinary transformations in the history of life. They learned to control their breathing with incredible precision. The muscles around the tongue, lips, and throat became far more refined. The vocal tract changed. The brain developed new regions dedicated to producing and understanding increasingly complex sounds. For the first time, our ancestors weren't just making noises. They were shaping ideas. That breakthrough would eventually become language. And once language appeared, laughter found an entirely new purpose. Think about the last joke that genuinely made you laugh. Maybe the ending caught you completely off guard. Maybe someone said something so unexpected that your brain needed a split second to catch up. That tiny moment of surprise isn't accidental. It's exactly how humor works. Scientists studying comedy have noticed a fascinating pattern. Nearly every joke follows the same hidden formula. Your brain predicts one outcome, then reality suddenly takes a different path. For a brief instant, something feels wrong. Then your brain realizes there's no danger at all. And instead of fear, you laugh. In psychology, this idea is often called a benign violation. Something seems to break the rules, but in a harmless way. The surprise creates pleasure instead of panic. And here's the astonishing part: that mechanism may be millions of years older than jokes themselves. Remember those young apes wrestling in the forest? One suddenly lunges forward. For a fraction of a second, it looks like a real attack. Then the playful laughter begins. The brain reaches the same conclusion: everything's okay. The situation looked dangerous, but it wasn't. Millions of years later, human humor is still built on that exact pattern. A joke tricks your expectations. A funny story creates a false alarm. An unexpected punchline briefly confuses your brain before revealing that everything is safe. In other words, the same mental process that once helped ancient apes play without fighting may still be making you laugh today. But language did something even more remarkable. It freed laughter from the physical world. Our ancestors no longer needed someone to trip over a rock or pretend to bite during play. Now they could create surprise using nothing but words. They could invent imaginary situations, tell exaggerated stories, imitate another person's voice, play with meanings, mock powerful leaders, tease close friends, and even laugh about events that had happened years earlier. For the first time in history, humans could make one another laugh without anything happening at all. All it took was an idea. That changed everything. Humor became more than entertainment. It became a way to teach. A clever story could warn children about danger. A funny mistake could be remembered for years. Shared jokes strengthened friendships and reinforced trust within growing communities. Long before books, schools, or the internet, laughter helped ideas spread from one generation to the next. Then, scientists uncovered another clue that revealed just how social laughter really is. Researchers noticed something surprising. People rarely laugh because they're alone. They laugh because someone else is there. Even when watching the exact same funny video, you're far more likely to laugh if another person is sitting beside you. Sometimes, you don't even need to know them. A stranger's laughter can trigger your own. Why? Because laughter isn't simply an emotional reaction. It's a conversation. Every genuine laugh quietly says the same thing. I understood that. I see what you see. We're thinking the same way. It's one of the oldest ways humans signal that they belong to the same group. And that realization raises another fascinating question. If language transformed laughter, how do babies laugh months before they can say their very first word? The answer would reveal that one of humanity's oldest behaviors is already waiting inside us before we ever learn to speak. If language transformed laughter, then one question becomes almost impossible to answer. Why do babies laugh long before they can speak? Watch a baby playing peekaboo, or gently tickle the bottom of their feet. Within months of being born, many babies burst into laughter, despite knowing only a handful of sounds. They can't tell stories. They don't understand jokes. They don't even know the meaning of most words. Yet somehow, they already know how to laugh. That puzzled scientists for decades. If laughter had simply been learned from parents or culture, babies shouldn't laugh until much later. Instead, researchers discovered something remarkable. Across almost every culture on Earth, children begin laughing at roughly the same stage of development. Whether they're growing up in a crowded city, a remote mountain village, or a rainforest community with a completely different language, the pattern barely changes. Nobody has to teach a baby how to laugh. Evolution already has. That realization changed the way scientists think about laughter. Instead of being something civilization invented, laughter appears to be one of the oldest social instincts humans are born with. Long before children learn grammar, long before they say their first sentence, they already know how to build connections. And laughter is one of their first tools. But babies weren't the only clue. Researchers studying adults noticed another strange pattern. Think about the last time you laughed so hard you could barely breathe. Now ask yourself something. Would you have laughed just as much if you had been completely alone? Probably not. Experiment after experiment has shown the same surprising result. People laugh dozens of times more often when they're with other people than when they're by themselves, even if the joke isn't especially funny, even if the other person is almost a stranger. Sometimes, another person's laughter is enough to trigger your own. Why would evolution design something like that? Because laughter isn't just an emotional response. It's social glue. Every shared laugh quietly tells the people around you, I'm not a threat. We're on the same side. I understand what you understand. Those messages helped ancient communities do something that no individual could accomplish alone. They built trust. And trust helped humans survive. Then scientists began asking an even bigger question. If every modern human laughs, did other humans laugh too? Not just our direct ancestors, but our closest evolutionary cousins, the Neanderthals. For generations, Neanderthals were imagined as silent, brutish creatures focused only on survival. But every new discovery has challenged that picture. Archaeologists found evidence that they cared for injured group members who could no longer hunt. Some survived for years with severe disabilities that would have made independent life impossible. Others reached old age despite serious injuries. Someone fed them, protected them, stayed with them. Then came more surprises. Neanderthals buried at least some of their dead. They made ornaments, used pigments, worked stone with extraordinary skill. Recent evidence even suggests they may have possessed the anatomical ability to produce complex speech, although scientists still debate just how sophisticated their language was. In other words, the gap between them and us has become smaller with every new discovery. Of course, no fossil can prove a Neanderthal laughed. Laughter leaves no bones behind. It doesn't fossilize. It disappears the moment the sound fades. But when scientists put all the evidence together, many believe it would be more surprising if Neanderthals never laughed than if they did. Imagine a winter evening roughly 60,000 years ago. Snow blankets the landscape outside. Inside a cave, firelight flickers across the walls. A group sits close together after a difficult day. One hunter returns empty-handed. A child stands up and copies the hunter's tired walk with exaggerated steps. For a moment, everyone tries to stay serious. Then someone smiles. Another lets out a short laugh. Within seconds, the cave fills with laughter. We'll never know whether that exact moment happened, but scenes like it may have unfolded thousands of times across Ice Age Europe. And if they did, then the laughter echoing through that cave wasn't very different from the laughter you hear today around dinner tables, campfires, classrooms, and living rooms all over the world. Which brings us to one final mystery. If laughter has survived millions of years, outlived countless human species, crossed continents, and remained almost unchanged across every culture on Earth, why has evolution held onto it for so long? The answer may reveal that laughter was never just something humans enjoyed. It may have been one of the reasons humans survived at all. So when did ancient humans first laugh? The honest answer is that no one will ever know. There was probably no single moment, no first joke, no ancient comedian who accidentally made history. Instead, laughter emerged so gradually that no generation would have noticed it changing. What began as a simple breathing signal during play slowly became something extraordinary. It built trust between ancient apes. It helped early humans cooperate in dangerous landscapes. It survived the rise of Homo erectus. It echoed through the lives of Neanderthals. It adapted as language transformed simple sounds into stories, jokes, and shared ideas. And somehow, after millions of years of evolution, it's still with us. Think about that for a moment. Every time you laugh with a friend, every time a child bursts into giggles, every time a family can't stop laughing around a dinner table, you're witnessing one of the oldest traditions in human history. Not a tradition written in books or carved into stone, but carried inside the human brain for millions of years. Long before cities existed, before farming, before writing, before the pyramids, before the first campfire stories, our ancestors were already sharing something that looked remarkably familiar: a laugh. The world around them was unimaginably harsh. Predators waited in the darkness. Food wasn't guaranteed. Disease, injury, and hunger were constant companions. Yet, in the middle of that uncertainty, they still found moments to play, to connect, to reassure one another that everything was okay. Perhaps that's the real reason laughter survived. Not because evolution cared whether we were happy, but because groups that stayed connected often survived longer than groups that didn't. A shared laugh could calm fear, strengthen trust, ease conflict, and remind exhausted people that they weren't facing the world alone. In that sense, laughter wasn't the reward for survival. It became part of the strategy. And maybe that's why it still appears in the moments when we need it most. People laugh after terrifying experiences, during stressful situations, at weddings, at funerals, even in hospitals. It seems strange until you remember what laughter has always been: a signal, one that has echoed across millions of years. A quiet way of saying, we're safe, we're still together, we'll get through this. Somewhere more than 10 million years ago, in a forest that has long since disappeared, one ancient ape made a strange panting sound while playing with another. It lasted only a few seconds. No one remembered it. No fossil preserved it. No record of it survives. Yet that tiny sound outlived ice ages, volcanoes, mass migrations, every civilization, every empire, every language, until eventually it became your laugh. The one you shared yesterday, the one you'll probably share again tomorrow. And perhaps that's the most remarkable part of all. Of everything our ancestors left behind, stone tools broke, wooden shelters disappeared. Even great civilizations eventually fell. But one simple sound never went extinct.